What is up, everybody? It is an early Monday evening. It is Path of Vengeance night, and really all of Phase 2. Tonight, we are going to be talking all things High Republic. We got a full crew to chat. I'm excited to hear your comments as well. So without any further ado, Wes, punch it. And welcome to the Living Force, a Utini Network podcast. Tonight, all about the Path of Vengeance. I'm one of your hosts, Eric Eilerson, and joining me tonight to talk all things about the final entry, book-wise, in Phase 2 of the High Republic is a full cast of characters, starting off with the man who is sweating like one of those kids in the caves before it explodes. It's Mr. Heat in 7, Dr. Charles Ankle.
Yeah,
what's up, buddy?
That's right. I actually am sweating. This room is a lot warmer at this time of day. If you guys don't know, we're recording early. That's because the NBA playoffs are tonight, and I have a team to go support and hopefully not watch lose. But that's how it's been going recently. So, yeah, Heat in 7. Heat in 7.
Heat in 7, absolutely. Keeping those good vibes going, or the man with the goodest vibes and the goodest fingers on the goodest keys. It's the goodest Wes Jenkins.
Hey, gooder, everybody. Yeah, well, I'm cheering on Charles. I won't change these lights to red. That was a mistake. I apologize profusely. But I'm waiting for tomorrow for the Stanley Cup playoffs to see if the LA Knights will take that home. I didn't get to watch last game, which was a day ago, 2 days ago, when they got into an all-out brawl at the very end of the third period. It was fantastic. Lots of punches were thrown, rats and bottles and stuff thrown on the ice.
Rats?
Yeah, they have plastic rats they throw on the ice at the Panthers games. They're weird.
Hey, you know what? I'm from Michigan, and we used to throw live octopi onto the sun.
Yes, that's even better.
So that's less weird. But the man who's not going to be throwing octopi or dead or plastic rats, I suppose, is the final member of our crew. The guy who just, he grounds us, he keeps us going, and I was supposed to see this weekend, but life got in the way. Is Mr. Timothy Guthrie. What's up, buddy?
What's up, guys? Sports ball. I'm not really doing that right now. I'm also not making my colors Heat. That's also probably my bad. So sorry, Charles. I support you in spirit. Otherwise, I don't really care because I've been reading Charles Soule's new book, The Endless Vessel, and it is freaking gorgeous, you guys.
God.
I have only read one chapter and I've already highlighted 3 things. So it's good.
Ooh,
it's a good time to be us. Oh yeah.
My package from that Kickstarter. So folks are watching the video. Tim has the Kickstarter exclusive edition, which I also ordered and has been accepted, shipment pending, whatever, for 4 days now. Post office, but happy for you and happy for everyone that is watching and or listening. I hope you're having a great week. So today is going to be all Roundtable. We're going right in. So just so you know, over this weekend, you may have heard of a little indie project called Star Wars Outlaws, which is a brand new Star Wars video game that got announced. We got 10 minutes of gameplay today. It was amazing, and we're not going to talk about it because what we're going to do is we're going to save that for next week's show. Next week, we're going to be talking about Outlaws. We're also going to have our big Star Wars Jedi Survivor talk. We're going to talk about the story of the game, how we thought about the game, talk about Outlaws and Star Wars gaming as a whole. So stay tuned for next week for that. We're going to make sure that has all the time we need because today, all we're going to do before we get into the roundup is, of course, a quick thank you to our patrons over at patreon.com/Utini. We have an amazing team over there. Tim, our Patreon manager, anything that folks can be looking forward to coming down the pipe since you're on the show?
Yeah, pretty quick. I'll just say we have a couple of new and former shows that may be coming back in the next month or two. So buckle up. It's going to be a fun ride.
Excellent. And make sure you got your Patreon RSS feed connected to whatever podcatcher you use. But head over to patreon.com/Utini to join because, yeah, there's some cool stuff coming this very month. But next very month, That's not a phrase people use, but we could. Next very month, you have a new Star Wars book coming out, which is Inquisitor: Rise of the Red Blade. That's coming out on July 18th. I've started reading it myself. I think I'm about 100 pages in or so. So make sure you get those pre-orders in. I think Delilah S. Dawson posted that the finished published copies are at her house at least now. So get excited. We got some evil books coming our way. But tonight, we do not have... Actually, no, we do have an evil book. What am I saying? That's exactly what we have. We have Path of Vengeance by Cavan Scott. This is where we get the full spoiler warning, everybody. From here on out, we're going to be spoiling what happens in the Path of Vengeance by Cavan Scott. We're going to be spoiling what happens in Phase 2 of the High Republic. And if you just jumped in Phase 2, we're going to be spoiling Phase 1, I guess, as well. All High Republic talk from here on out. So stay tuned. And unlike our previous roundtables, we're trying something a little bit different. Because full transparency, when we read a lot of these Star Wars books, sometimes when we read them, it starts to feel a little more like work and could zap some of the enjoyment out of reading. Some of you that try to keep up on everything may feel this from time to time, so we're right there with you. So tonight, as opposed to our full synopsis, point by point, bit by bit, a little more kind of rigid storytelling, we're just going to be 4 best friends sitting around chatting about a book. So join us, take a seat, crack your drink, and fellas, let's talk about the Path of Vengeance. Very briefly, this is the book that rounded out Phase 2. It took place over 3 parts of the Battle of Jeddah, the Battle of Dalna, and the Battle for the Path, respectively, is how Cavan kind of split up his book. This brought us all the way through Marda Rowe, essentially taking her place at the head of the Path of the Open Hand, which is now the Path of the Closed Fist. And presumably got us ready for Phase 3. So I'm going to start very, very basically. Charles, I'm going to throw to you first, dude. What'd you think? Just let's do purely as a book. We'll talk about how it fits into Phase 2 and the phases as a whole. Purely as a reading experience, what did Path of Vengeance do for you?
Okay, so I think that the book was actually written quite well. I mean, I've loved pretty much everything Cavan Scott has done previously. So I would say it's the same for this story as well. I mean, written very well. I thought the pacing was good. The only hiccups I think for me with the actual pacing is knowing a lot of what's coming, right? You're kind of like, hey, get to it, because I already know how these events turn out. It was more like almost we were getting a peek behind the curtain from the past couple of books we read. And so it did feel a little repetitive in that way. And I do think that took away from my enjoyment to a certain degree. And I'm sure we'll kind of go into detail on that. But overall, I think the actual book is written very well. I just think that the way that it was set up and the job that it had to do was a little less satisfying for me than getting an original story cover to cover.
Excellent. I agree with a lot of what you said, and I'm jumping there in a bit. But Tim, I want to go next to you, man. Obviously, it's been a while because you read this around the time that I did. What do you remember of this reading experience, and how did it hit you?
Yeah, this was the most, I think, consistent book that I don't know. It had me on the hook, I think. The most consistent of Phase 2, in my opinion, for sure. But I was very interested in this story most of all. I wanted to see what happened with Marda. I wanted to see what happened with that whole gang. I feel like this was the story that I was missing from the rest. And yeah, I think Cav killed it. He did a good job. He killed a bunch of people, which is as per course.
As he does.
So yeah, I don't know. I was on the hook for it. I finished it pretty quickly. It kind of left me sad that it ended here in a way, like just as I was starting to really jive with some of the characters. So it feels a little empty, but I think he did a good job with what it was.
All right. Wes, where are you on this one?
Yeah, so I am almost opposite of what Charles said. So I enjoyed that they kind of rehashed some of this, because I forgot a lot about what happened in Phase 2 from the various time jumps that we were having when the books were coming out, right? So I did order the book to read, and it sat on my nightstand for 3 weeks until the audiobook came out, and I listened to the audiobook. So that's how I took it in, listened to it on the way to work, and then a little bit when I was cooking, doing dishes, doing dishes crew. What's up?
Yes!
But yeah, I think it was, from what I was listening to, I think it was very well written. I thought that we lost maybe a little bit of story that we were kind of searching for with Marda Rowe and how she ascended and then stayed in that spot. Maybe we get a more story after this somehow. Or there's some kind of flashback in phase 3 that tells us about something. But there's a couple key points and Easter eggs and highlights in there that from phase 1 that's in phase 2. You're like, oh, well, that's where that comes from, kind of thing. But there was really no connection that I've kind of picked out between Marda Rowe and Markion Rowe, other than the name that I was searching for the entirety of the book. So, but like Charles said, very well written. It was very well written. So and there were some of the sound effects in the audiobook. I mean, 10 out of 10, audio drama like esque. It was very, very well done. Very, very well done.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, because that's one of the things. Obviously, this audiobook was delayed for a month. So a lot of folks may not have finished it yet. And the YA audiobooks are, because this is technically YA, are kind of hit and miss sometimes. So it's great to hear.
Yeah.
I'm glad that they put some production in it. I've thought a lot about this book since I read it in a bunch of different ways. And my main thing about this book is that this is the most meta I've ever read a book. As in, it's the most I've ever thought about the outside repercussions of a story while reading, and not in a good way, I think I'm going to say. Because I agree that as a book, as a novel written by Cavan Scott with characters, action, and plot, this is incredible. It's a phenomenal book. It's at least, I'd say, top 2 in the phase, if not better than Cataclysm. This and Cataclysm I put, just on a craft standpoint, I think it's right there.
I agree, it's the best. For me, it's the best.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, this is an incredibly made book. But as I was reading it, I could not physically let go of wondering, what is this going to tell me about phase 1? What is this going to tell me about the other ones? Oh no, same thing as you, Charles. I had a huge issue at the top of the book, and I put this in our review on the site. I had a really big issue with the fact that we had so many parts of the Battle of Jeddah, which I had been reading since January, which Cavan had been reading in a comic already, and I'd heard in an audio drama already. And I'm like, I don't care about Jeddah anymore. And now, if I hadn't read any of that, as a book, he wrote it very well. The characters were done very well, but I knew all of that. And then we got to the Night of Sorrows on Dalna, and I'm like, I just read all of that in Cataclysm. And any time that I pulled myself out among the narrative and just missed what Cavan was doing, I didn't have as good of a time, and I wasn't really trying to read the book again. But if I just read the book and kind of gave over to the story, I couldn't escape the craft of it. It's very much the Rising Storm-esque book of this phase. There's a lot of destruction in it. There's a lot of darker moments, and some of the scenes, like Stephanie says in the chat, the scene where Marda takes control of the path and has this giant speech about the path of the closed fist. I wrote that in my notes as possibly a Utini moment of moment of the year. I'm like, that is really well done. And some of the conversations were super eloquent and done the way only Cavan can do. But it really made me think, would I be a happier Star Wars reader if I actually didn't read everything and I just gone from Path of Deceit to Path of Vengeance? Which is odd, because that is what we have been told not to do in the High Republic. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. So that was odd for me.
I felt like there was a great connection. One thing that Phase 2 did really well, I think, was that the 2 middle grades books played directly into each other. The 2 YA novels directly into each other. And the same thing with the adult books. It's like, if you were interested in the galactic, large scale kind of stuff, read the adult books. If you want this very intense story about the path, read the young adult books, and you don't have to read everything else. But there were times it felt a bit like, did y'all ever watch Vantage Point, that 2008 movie with Dennis Quaid, where it's like you see the same thing happen over and over and over and over and over again from different perspectives? This is from a certain point of view, phase 2. It was kind of exhausting.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I think that whatever your reading journey is, everyone watching or listening, I'm fascinated to know how this hit you, because it also made me think, is there a better way to do this? Because we've been pretty blunt about Lucasfilm and Penguin Random House Worlds' issues with publicity about the High Republic and transparency about where stuff takes place, what's coming out, stuff like that. So we've kind of just said read everything. After reading this book, going into phase 3, has your guys' opinion on that changed, or do you still think that reading everything is still probably the best way to get the whole story? Because I'm kind of in the middle right now.
I haven't seen him do this before. So if this is going to be a consistent thing, then I might think about like skipping and then. But how are you going to know though? That's the thing. So when you have these books,
listen
come
to
out,
our show.
Yeah, that's the thing. We're not going to be able to skip. We'll read it for you, and then we'll let you know.
We'll let you know.
But I hope they don't. This doesn't turn into a consistent thing where they kind of rehash everything in the last book, and I don't think they will. But I think reading everything and then being able to pick out those details and be like, oh, that's really what I think is what it's all about. What you get the most joy out of is. It's like finding those specific details in all these little books, or in all the books, and then you read the last book, and it just kind of falls into place, and it makes it that much better that you read all of those books, and you didn't just read it for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think an interesting thing about this, I mean, I would like to know who in our audience has not read the book and is listening to this. Like, I would like to know how many people actually have experienced the High Republic that way, because I do think it's very possible to do it. Tim, you were talking about watching people playing video games on YouTube. I mean, it's the same thing. You're just getting the story, a different way. I don't know though. This phase to me, it felt like two kind of separate stories, and I guess it was supposed to a degree. But the Marda and just the row stuff and the path stuff in general felt like one story, and then all the like Ziri Fan 2 stuff, I mean, feels just like light years away from all of that, even though there is ultimately some crossover. At the end of the book, and I'm sure we're going to talk about our feelings when we kind of finally set the book down, but I had to look back and ask myself, why did we go through those two storylines? Because they are very separate in such excruciating detail, spending entire books going into these these occasions and all of these things that happened, and then at the end of the phase, you have to look back and ask yourself, was all of that necessary?
Yeah. Well, and let's hit that. I think let's follow this where it goes, because I want to ask you guys, number one, about what's necessary, right? This whole Marda story, because this is very Marda Row centric. This is Marda, Matty, and Yana are like the trio of people that really kind of run this book. And we haven't really seen Marda since Path of Deceit. Like, we'd heard slightly about it, but we haven't seen her in a hot minute. And she is apparently, like, she's a Row. Is she starting the Nile? Like, kind of a big deal to kind of leave her alone. Like you said, Charles, in that Ziri Fan 2 plot, which completely separated itself for the most part. What did you guys think about her journey in this book, from kind of becoming slightly disillusioned with the mother to, by the end, literally demanding the leveler attack the mother, and then taking over and saying, we are now a closed fist, and drawing the lightning on her face? Like, was she still likable, relatable? Did you purely enjoy it? Ooh, Charles, you're giving me a no. You're giving me a no.
Not likable whatsoever. Enjoyable, yes, because she was unhinged, and we're seeing kind of, I think, the genetic, predecessor to some of the craziness we see in Markian Row in phase 1. I mean, that came from somewhere, you know what I mean? And it seems like a lot of it came from Marda. But I didn't actually find her transformation in this book all that believable. And I think part of it is because we did spend so long away from her, and then we came back and she's doing just outlandish stuff where she cuts off her cousin's hand. Like, out of
Yeah.
nowhere, and
That
then
was
2
wild.
minutes later it's like apologizing to her, and they're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, it's fine." And I was
No,
sitting
it's
there
on
like,
me.
"What?
That's on me.
If you cut my hand off, I am not like walking around the compound with you later, like scheming how to whatever. Like, absolutely not." So like
Yeah.
it felt like those story beats were good story beats to me. Like if I read like an outline per se, and I saw like then this is gonna happen, then eventually this, and this, I would see a natural progression. I'd be like, hey, I like that. That makes sense. We're going to see her go to a really dark place and then swing back a little bit. But it just happened over too short of a time period for me personally for it to feel believable. And that is probably a consequence of, again, spending so much time away from her in this phase. And that begs the question, like, why was it so important to spend so much time away from her? Obviously, the rose and the path are, I thought this phase, at least, that was the main goal, right? Was establish their history, and that we were going to get a bunch of information that was important for phase 3. And then here we are at the end, and we spent so much time doing other things that has to be important to some degree. We just can't really see how those puzzle pieces all fit in. So yes, enjoyable because she's crazy, right? But
Yes.
not all that believable to me.
Interesting. And I want to just touch, like, it'll be interesting in phase 3 to see what the other stuff does, because obviously the Marda and Yana is a 1-to-1 with Markion, and we know that Starlight Beacon landed on Irem, so there is that. But like, if we're gonna see Ziri Fontu's like wedding area or something, like, I wonder how that'll fit in. But West Tim, what do you guys think about Marda in there? Similarly, kind of enjoyable, but a little far fetched.
Yeah, I wish we could have had a little bit more kind of character build up to where she was going to progress towards that path of the closed fist or whatever. But it feels like they did. It looks like to me that they did that so quickly, because it looks like there's going to be some exponential moves between where Marda is now to where Markion ends or starts with the Nile, right? Because they're still. I'll just back up here a minute. So we wanted to know what was the Nile? How did it even start? And it starts as like a cultish group of just like followers that say, you know what? The Force should not be screwed with like the Jedi do, that manipulate it and do stuff like that. So there's a ripple effect that ruins everything else whenever you manipulate the Force. But we didn't get a lot of like build up after that, after they moved on from the open hand to the closed fist. And then, so it looks like there's going to be an exponential step to where we get it in phase 2, or when we get to phase 2, if you haven't read phase 2, where it's just like a gang, pretty much, where they're doing a bunch of drugs and eating Pizza Hut or something. But like there's not I feel like it's going to be a steep climb and not just like a slow progression up a hill or something, right? So I think it's maybe why they did it that way, because they didn't give us enough time, right? If there was like, if we had started out with the open hand and then like maybe in the middle, like the second book was you got the closed fist, and then now she's like, I don't know, she goes to a bar and she starts sniffing drugs, and she's like, man, I kind of like this. And then she's like, hey, you want to try some of this too? And they're like, yeah, let me get into it. And then so like, oh, I got this like merry band of followers that's addicted to drugs. And now we figured out that we have to support our drug habit by stealing more Jedi artifacts that turn into something else. I don't know. But
it feels like I'm riding something like a storm. Ooh, let's use that.
Yeah, but
write it down.
There wasn't a slow progression towards. I wish they would have. That way would have it would have made it more believable for phase 1 on where the Nile are now. But I mean, like, I don't know how they're gonna marry these two stories together. Pretty much.
Yeah. Well, and Stephanie makes a good point in the chat. Says, 150 years passed between phase 2 and 1, and I agree, and I think that's cool. This then begs the question, which we're gonna hit real hard. I think probably to the end of our conversation of, why did this happen? Why did we pick 150 years ago as opposed to 50 years like the prequels? Anyway, that is a huge question, and I think it's a very good point. But Tim, I want to hear your Marda thoughts before we hit those.
Overall, I think I enjoyed her arc a little bit. I think it was rushed at the end a bit, but I did really enjoy the fact that Cav did not have her and Yana riding off in the sunset together. I like that they ended up going their own paths. And I was kind of worried that we were going to end with, oh, everything's okay, you cut off my arm, but like that's fine.
Who among us,
no.
hasn't?
Yeah, I very much appreciate the fact that they went their different ways. I also liked the device, I guess that's what you would call it, of them, both her and Yana seeing and having conversations with their, with Kevmo and with Yana's ex-girlfriend. Like that was so eerie throughout.
Why weren't they italicized on the page?
Yes,
Why weren't the ghosts
Oh my God,
Can we talk about this? Can we talk about this?
It was such a choice to not do that. I could not tell if it was real, like what was.
I think that's the point, right?
Oh.
That sucks.
I can work
it's a
my way around
publishing
there.
issue.
Yeah.
Italicized ghost voices, because I guarantee you, Wes, on the audiobook where they
did it.
had a whispery
Yes,
fight.
they did a really good job
voice.
of depicting out that these were like voices or ghosts in their head. Like if they
You got to italicize.
yeah, if you didn't have any, if it just had like just quotations to it, yeah, that would have screwed me up. I don't have that kind
I
of
actually like
creativity.
the choice. I really like it.
Okay, so Charlie, Stephanie
worked.
likes the choice.
I think it
Confused
worked
me.
whenever they would respond out loud to to whatever the ghost was saying, and then the person next to them would be like, "What did you say?" or "What are you talking about?" Like, okay, kind of there. But the whole rest of the book, no, please italicize.
But also, here's what I say about that too. If an idea is meant to confuse or throw somebody off, right? That means the protagonist is being thrown off, because as reader, we are reading through the eyes of the protagonist. They're not confused about whether they're here or not. They know they are dead and are ghosts. So the protagonist knows that this is Kevmo speaking. I as reader am confused where the character is not. So that bridge breaks. So I lose the immersion.
Ronan,
if the character's confused and I'm confused, that's fine.
Yeah, Ronan italicized, right?
Ronan, yes.
and
Ronan italicized.
Ronan's
Ronan
a whole nother
bolded.
That's fair.
Ronan wrote backwards, right to left. Like
there's like words written along the edges of the pages if you like hold it at a certain angle. Ronan was weird as hell.
It's technically a cipher if you read it in a certain order.
No, but so, to get back to your point though, Tim, I agree with you that I did really like that choice in the story, like to have them talking to these dead people that were important to them. Because what's kind of interesting is that they were very young when they made it to the path, right? And they constantly talk about how their species, the Evereni, are like feared and hated kind of throughout the universe or throughout the galaxy. And you never really fully understand why. There are little tidbits that they've kind of been told about themselves, but they were so young, they probably don't know all that much about their own people. And at the beginning of this story, I think it was maybe Yana at the time, maybe it was Marda, I don't remember, was saying that there's a rumor that Evereni can speak to the dead, right? And they dismissed it. They dismissed it as that's nonsense. And then like, I don't know, 5 pages later, they think they might be speaking to the dead. So like playing off of that, like, hey, where you start questioning yourself and what you are, you know what I mean? And you say, hey, am I this evil thing? Because now all these things that I thought were fake, I'm experiencing. I thought that was really interesting and made a lot of sense to kind of spur some of the character changes that were happening.
Yeah. I want to add, as far as the Marda idea, just to round out that bit, I know this is going to be highly divisive amongst probably our listeners and the High Republic fans who we love and who, as we saw at Star Wars Celebration, are extremely passionate about this whole phase. I wish this would have just been a numbered trilogy of Marda's story. Like literally spines on the books, book 1, 2, 3. If Ziri and Fontu are going to be in here, cool. They got to be in, like, Game of Thrones it. Make it, here's a Ziri Fontu chapter, here's a Marda chapter, but give me book. I think that bouncing between them made the overall narrative not as important, because I had, similarly to you guys, I had forgotten enough about Marda that when we got her, I found it a little off-putting that she had changed so much. That being said, folks that went from Deceit to Vengeance, who I saw online, loved it, because there is a nice through line if you had that in your mind. But I think that if it had just been this actual story as a trilogy or what have you, I would have followed it a bit better and liked it more because I wouldn't have been trying to think on how it fits into all the other narratives. Marda as a character, I still find fascinating. I think she's really interesting. If you just put her on paper from beginning to end, like you guys were saying as a narrative, I think it makes sense. Go from the quiet cult person to the like angry cult leader. We've seen that in history. Like that's a thing. That's very real. I don't mind that at all. It's just all the stuff they got put in there, like the additional comics characters too, like Vildar and Matty and Tay, which I know are the trio from the comic, which I still don't quite understand, but I know Cav loves, and he brings his characters in, kind of like DJO did with Midnight Horizon, which I liked better. So who knows? I'm probably slightly hypocritical about that. But I felt like there were a lot of things trying to get in the way of this great narrative, despite the fact that it was all super well written. Like we said with Cav, it did kind of muddy those waters for me. All the while I'm trying to think of how is Markian Rowe going to deal with these ancestors. But them aside, the other part of it, of course, was Matty, who, now correct me if I'm wrong, Timothy, I think you've read the comic, but Wes and Charles, you guys had never met Matty before this book, right? You haven't read the comic.
Right.
Okay, so for you guys first, what was she, did you get her? Did you understand her kind of character in this book if she had just been first introduced here, or did you feel like there was required reading for this new protagonist?
I did not see her as something great or bad, right? So I mean, I saw her as a normal Jedi. Yeah, like normal Jedi or Padawan. She didn't seem like she had a interesting backstory that I need to go back and check out. If they would have laid out some kind of information about that, I might have, but they didn't. I didn't feel like I needed to know anything else about her.
Yeah, I agree. I felt about her the way that I feel about a lot of the like Legends books that are about, an evil character or whatever, but then you also need that Jedi counterbalance in the interim chapters, and you don't really care about them and they're not all that important. And sometimes they just die at the end and you're like, all right, I'm going to go about my business.
Oh no.
That's kind of how I felt about her. Yeah. I mean, she wasn't particularly interesting and I didn't feel like I had missed much prior to this book that I needed to know.
Yeah, she was like a vessel for the story and what they needed in that way. Like, and we had a lot of those characters in Cataclysm too. Like a lot of the Jedi in Phase 2 were similarly like for plot and they moved stuff along. But I think I agree. I had a tougher time isolating them. Now
I might say all of them, dude. I know we're gonna get around to Phase 2 later, but
we're gonna hit it in a second.
I would maybe say all of them.
I'm trying to think of one to disagree, and I'm having trouble. While I think, Tim and Mommy, sorry, Timothy, what'd you think about Matty coming in comics? Like, did she have her moment here, or similarly, was she just kind of, this was the Jedi because there are two non-Jedi people that we also have to keep track of?
Yeah, I need to go back and reread the comics, but I think I liked her here more. Maybe
I agree.
Some of that is because I think her ADHD-ness was really able to come through, and I relate. So
you're like, I see you.
Yeah. She's chaotic and always in her head and always talks too much, and so like her characterization was able to come through just fine. But yeah, I think to Charles's point, she very much feels like I needed a good guy on the page in a bad story, and something to relate to. I liked her characterization with who was the master that she was with? I just lost that name.
Vildar?
Maybe
no, that's in the comics.
No, that's in the comics.
One. Oh, you're talking about Zeveron?
Yes.
The mother's.
Yeah.
Oh, Olivia.
Yeah, Olivia, right?
Daughter,
Olivia.
whatever.
Yeah,
Olivia. Yeah,
their relationship
Matty
was
and
okay.
Marda and Olivia.
Yeah.
Put an H on it. That's Olivia.
But you just made the point, Tim. You can't even remember.
Can't remember
name.
the names. Yeah. Which is funny because at the end I loved her particular ending and how all that went down. But anyways.
Well,
there were two main characters with an O.
Go ahead, Wes.
They were both women. There was Olivia, and there was the Herald's wife's name. Didn't it start with an O? Ophelia or something like that?
Oh,
yes.
something like that.
Bara or something like that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I almost got that mixed up a little bit because they were kind of looking for each other in a similar chapter.
Need a dramatis personae.
Yeah.
Oh, we do. Are you kidding? When they went to Planet X, all those like 3 different ships of people, not a chance in hell.
Oh,
Not
yeah.
a single one.
Agreed.
I was skipping
not
back
a
30 seconds like 3 or 4 times. I was like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
I don't get
No,
it. I don't get it.
There's
I don't
3
get
different ships of 3 different crews. Not a chance. I didn't get a single. I even wrote in my notes. I'm like, listen, this is fun action. I love the King Kong vs. Godzilla-ness of that scene. Not a single person.
I would have loved more concept art as well. Just throwing that out there.
Yes, that was fun. That was very fun. Now I really want us to talk about Phase 2 as a whole because I think that's such a meaty conversation. But I want to touch on Olivia for a second because Olivia Zeveron was a huge character in this book. I thought she was written very well, very classic Jedi. Very, I think it was Jedi Knight, did her job, and obviously finding out that the mother is her sister was like this big reveal. Unless you're keyed into Star Wars Twitter or any social media, because they revealed the mother's last name was Zeveron 6 months ago in Wikipedia.
Really?
And there was a YouTube video where they do, the High Republic is an age of heroes, and Avar Chris, like it's one of those shorts, which were fun. They did the mother and gave her last name in that short over 8 months ago.
Show of hands, who knew that before going into this book? Because I definitely did.
Yeah.
Absolutely did.
Okay,
But
so only Wes didn't know.
I was
do
happily
appreciate
surprised.
They subverted my expectations though, because I was expecting it to be a mom and daughter relationship.
Me too. I
So I
expected
the
that.
mother. That's a little on the nose, Tim.
It is. It is.
They've done it before.
They
Vader,
tricked your
sorry.
ass,
Vader
Tim.
means father in German. Yeah.
So I'm glad they went the sister route, but yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways.
I like that route, but I also, as I was reading, I'm like, okay, they're like, and she felt something like they're related. She couldn't really figure out what's going on. It's because they're related. I don't know. And it's like 450 pages. And then she's like, wait, it's you. I'm like, this is not a reveal. But the book was written as though it was a reveal. And I'm like, this was a massive publicity gaffe, I think, because Cavan wrote this book with the assumption that no one would know anything about the mother. Yet the Star Wars YouTube channel and Wikipedia and everything had that moment 6 months before release.
Well, hang on. Can I push back on that a little bit?
Do it.
I agree. It was probably a misstep, but let's pretend. And actually, I'd like to hear Wes's input on this since he went into this particular reveal blind. Let's the rest of us have a thought experiment here. You didn't know. Okay, you get the reveal.
All
It's a cool moment. You get the reveal.
in there.
What's the point? What's the fallout there? What's the next step that comes from that? Just to know that the mother was related to a Jedi.
I listened to this today, so
Yes,
I recently
it's
finished the book
fresh.
today. It's very fresh. So when I heard this, the reasoning was because the Jedi came to Olivia and
Olivia.
the mother
Olivia.
Alicia.
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 Yeah.
So they went to their house.
Olivia and Alicia, the Star Wars characters.
And they took Olivia instead of Alicia based on her force powers because she was able to manipulate the force and move things around. They were like, you know what?
Yep.
We want her. And the mother had such resentment for that. She became, even though she was force sensitive, she had made this diabolical plan since a child to completely have this scheme to rule the world and take out the Jedi.
Yep.
And manipulate people through the Force and say that she wasn't Force sensitive, all because she wasn't picked first. She wasn't picked with the Jedi. So I thought that I didn't buy it. That's what it was. I didn't buy the
mastermind
whole scheme.
villain got picked last for kickball at recess.
That's what it was.
That's what happened.
Yeah. So
I
But,
so weirdly bought
what
it.
does that
I
give
bought
me?
it.
Yeah.
What does
Oh,
that
I-
give me for Marky and Roe and the Nile? Why do I care that it started because her sister got picked? I guess that's what I'm ultimately getting at. Yes, it's a reveal. I just don't feel like it was that meaningful of it felt like one of those ties that you don't need where you're like, well, Luke was related to Darth Vader and that worked out really well for the story. Let's just make people related. and it
Well,
makes
and-
the galaxy
Oh.
feel small, and that is a problem that happens a
Mm.
lot in Star Wars for me.
Mhm.
The interesting
it,
thing they
Tim.
bring up there, though, is that it does not, that reveal does nothing for the Rose sisters. Like it means something
Right.
to the mother that,
Right.
her sister was a thing, but it doesn't mean anything to the grand plot
Nope.
in general.
Well, then
It just
that goes
adds-
back
yeah.
to the original question,
Yeah.
and why?
It just kind of adds to the meta, the Jedi suck
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
thing that's happening right now.
This for
Sorry,
me.
we
so-
didn't kidnap both of you. I mean,
And really upset your parents into their dismay, and they never have children again.
Yeah. Well, so here's the crazy counter. I'm gonna go completely the opposite point of this because this is what actually made the book make sense for me. Wildly, because here's where I come from. First of all, having them take Olivia and not Alicia, the fact that this entire cult that became religious doctrine was made because of very human anger at the Jedi and the sister, then almost nullifies the entire religious beliefs of entire society and shows kind of the fallacy of cults and the fallacy of certain religions and leaders. And I think that that's a great horrifying kind of point to make, is that the Jedi actually listen to the Force, whereas this other place, oh no, I was mad at my sister, but I still created a society with enough fervor to want to destroy the galaxy. And like that's kind of a terrifying precedent to send. A terrifying precedent to set. Sorry about that. Like Palpatine basically wanting to destroy the Jedi, so he then decided, I want to take over the galaxy, me and one apprentice, and to do that, I'm gonna kill probably billions of people in a galactic war to take over. Like whatever you start small, the fact that you can then have enough power to create an entire society of murderers is terrifying. And then simultaneously, I think it talks about the Jedi as being flawed because they ignored this child and stunted her development and growth and feeling of belonging. And Marda, who we saw as super devout and Path of Deceit and even Path of Vengeance, she's so far into it that finding out that this entire thing, that the Force will be free and her entire livelihood, her entire belief in the fabric of the universe was built upon a woman who at all that time was actually Force sensitive and was just trying to get back at her sister, that shattered her so much. And I think that's like the last bit of like, you know what? Doesn't matter how it started. This doctrine is in me now. I refuse to believe the truth I'm told because I am only a fanatic. And I'm going to go forward with fanaticism. And fanaticism leads to insanity. And I think that's how we eventually get to the Nile. So that's why it made sense to me.
She takes the embodiment of the Creed Bratton quote. She could not have fun as a cult follower, so she decided to make a bunch of money as the cult leader.
There you go. And whether that comes to fruition in the future or not, we'll find out. So shout out to Stephanie in the chat again. She put in our Discord to make sure that you reread Rising Storm chapters, I believe 5, 7, and 11, which I did do before this show because those are the chapters where Marchion Rogue goes back to this icy planet with the bird guy to find his cousin. And there's a ton of quotes in there that talk about Marchion. Have you come back to the path? Will you open the hand? Will you do all these things? So I'm wondering now, like, is that fanaticism linked? Dramatically, losing that reveal still bugs me, publicity-wise. But I think that makes sense.
I did completely forget that she could have been Force sensitive. I loved that play at the end, the reveal that she actually was, because she was getting feeble around the leveler, and then she had all these wraps around herself.
We're like, there's no way.
Yeah. That was great.
Yeah.
And her little mind manipulation thing, like that was a neat kind of large scale.
When she
Sunshine Dobbs, man.
Yeah.
When she had those wraps on her hands for a heartbeat, I thought she was gonna end up being that like wrapped character that was with Yoda or something later in the timeline, but no.
All right, let's hit it. Let's hit that, because I think after phase 1, we were like, here's this mystery character. We're going to go back to the past. Gentlemen, I have one question for you to start, and then we're just going to branch. Was phase 2 worth it? Sorry, it's two-prong. Was phase 2 worth it? And 2, if not, was there a way to tell this story in a different way that it would have been?
I wonder if this would have been better as a phase 1 kind of thing, or if it would have been better if these were closer together, not being 100 years.
Years wise.
Yeah, years
Yeah.
wise.
If
So
Marta,
right
if
now,
Marta,
no.
yeah, if Marta Rowe was Markion Rose, mother, like, yeah, because
We've
right
seen
now
the-
she's her
we've seen the
great.
grandma.
He's got to be the
Yeah,
great
we've seen
grandma,
3.
right? Maybe,
least.
or it could be like a
At
great
least,
aunt
yeah.
or something. And I
Yeah.
don't know. So, yeah. So yeah, I'll start it off. No. No.
Okay.
Like I don't even see where the Arano and
You can get
what's the
there.
other
You
one?
can get it. It's there.
Iram.
Nope.
Okay, here's
Yes!
here's
I
another.
believed in you.
Here's another problem that I had. So it was Iram and Arano. We agree on
Yep.
that, right?
Yes.
Well, the narrator for Path of Vengeance called it Arono, and I was upset to no end when I kept hearing. I just wanted to stop and be like, "It's Arano," because I've heard it like that for the past like 6-7 months. Can we please get this right? But
well, Markion Martian. All right.
anyways,
Listen, if we can go on YouTube to find an author say their own name before we interview them, you can go to YouTube and hear how things are pronounced.
yeah, that's a pretty stupid thing to say. All right, anyways, but that whole story with Iram and Arano and the battling between the families, I hope that comes back around to give us some kind of other than like that's where Starlight Beacon crashed into one of the planets, right? In the water
Yep.
world. So
The Iram, yeah.
that better
The
not be
water
the
world.
that better not be the only thing that ties in phase 2 to phase 1. But I mean, it was a lot. It was a lot. It was a lot, dudes, to read to not get the payoff kind of that I was looking for. And I'll just say that, I mean, the payoff I was looking for was how did the Nile get to be the Nile? That's kind of where I was looking at.
And who's with Yoda?
And who's with Yoda? Yeah,
Who's with
that's-
Yoda?
That was
Yeah,
my
yeah.
biggest thing. I will echo Wes, and I will say no, but I'm gonna give it the little asterisk caveat and refuse to be painted into the corner because you can't really answer this question until you get the full story, right?
true.
Until we get
That's
phase
true.
3 and we see what breadcrumbs were they leaving. Right now, some stuff might feel empty that later is gonna have some substance. But as of right this second, no, it was not worth it. And I would go so far as to say when I put this book down, I was greatly disappointed. Like to the point that I think I messaged you, Eric, and we never get this negative on this show. And I apologize, and I'll be out of my funk tomorrow unless Miami loses later tonight. I felt like I had wasted my time. I really, really did. I did not think that the time and the effort to read all of these books lived up to my expectation. And maybe this is the exact problem that happened with the prequels. And I just sound like some old person that hated the movie in the late 90s. But it just didn't feel worth it.
All right.
Yeah.
I want to hit that prequel thing, but Tim, I want to hear from you.
Yeah, let's.
Yeah, I'm gonna say no as a High Republic initiative thing, but I think I enjoyed the collective of the phase on its own. If you stripped the High Republic, the little ties to it, I think this would have been a fine Star Wars series, or whatever.
Yes.
But as the prince that was promised, as this is going to give you the answers we're looking for, I don't think it was that.
I agree with that.
Yep. I think the big issue that I see is that phase 2 was pitched to be the prequel trilogy, like Star Wars, right? It was 4, 5, 6, then 1, 2, 3. They did that. 3 novels, and then they go back. I think the problem was Return of the Jedi, for all intents and purposes, did not end on a cliffhanger. The story's done. You could be. They defeated the Empire, they defeated Vader, and they won the day. This is like doing A New Hope and Empire, and then putting the prequel trilogy before you do Jedi. And I think that's was the problem, is that you were...
Isn't that like machete order that some people do watch the movies?
Exactly. But they're all out now, right?
People are sick. No.
And or even better, it's also like doing Game of Thrones and then stopping after season 5, showing House of the Dragon when you don't have 6 and 7 and having to wait more years. Like, your story isn't finished, so you had to prove in this phase that there is material that is worth me waiting to go to my stuff I want to get to. So for me, unfortunately, I'm gonna round us out with 4 for 4. I don't think it was worth it. We haven't done this yet, obviously, because it's not out. I would be shocked if our Utini official reading order doesn't suggest you going from phase 1 to phase 3, depending on what happens. That being said, I agree with you completely, Tim. I now, not knowing phase 3, wish that we would have had phase 1 as done. I wish they would have gone directly to phase 3, whatever it is, and done that full story. And then we get like a High Republic adult duology, Convergence Cataclysm. Awesome. We get a High Republic young adult duology, Path of Deceit, Path of Vengeance. Ooh, that's fun. Like, do them afterwards like they are doing House of the Dragon in Game of Thrones right now to be like, hey, you got this narrative, but don't you want to live in this world again? You know, I really do. And maybe you'll get some context for the story you've already finished. And I think that's the issue, is that you told us that the story wasn't finished, and the only way you could progress was if we had this part of the tale. And at this point now, these books in phase 2 for me haven't given me enough of that. I will say this though, to kind of bring us slightly back up. At the end of Path of Vengeance, I did have the first inkling of, I can start to see what phase 3 might be in response to this. With the closed fist stuff, with now the mother being force sensitive, with a lot of the leveler lore, the eggs, like we saw a lot of that kind of stuff. I feel like when that stuff happens in phase 3, I will now be more informed, which will be cool. But I'm gonna be a bit surprised if we couldn't have just gone from phase 1 to phase 3.
So to take it back to the movie thing, and something that Tim said that I think is important, because there was a second half to the question you asked at the beginning, Eric, which was, what could they have done differently, or how could they have done this better? And Tim's answer I agree with, which is they could have made it closer in time. And the reason for that is we spent at the end of the day, Star Wars events are just craziness. It's just like super evil person did this, blew up a planet, like holy crap. But at the end of the day, it's a character driven story. And it's a lot of the major ideas behind it that the characters go through are very just straightforward, very simple ideas when you boil them down. And the reason why I think that the prequels work for me, other than, the fact that I was the perfect age to watch them and stuff, is that super important characters from the original stories are still in it. Like, imagine if phase 2 was a young Loden Greatstorm almost kind of figuring things out, and then ultimately he can't and dies at the hands of the leveler in phase 1. Like, that to me has so much more weight behind it. And I feel like I would have been hooked from page 1 to read about how did he become that Jedi that I saw, that I was so horrified when we saw him die, and how will his protege carry things forward and hopefully fix this whole mess. To me, that's so much more interesting than going back to people who will never have a chance of weighing in on the overall kind of finality of the High Republic.
Yeah. I would have loved that. And I think that if you're going to do that, and not to say that can't happen now, but I think there is an element of, this was supposed to be the big swing. And I also think that is an unfair pressure to put on books, right? Like I said, this was the most meta read I've ever had. If we had had books that had like Young Loden Greatstorm or stuff like that, it would have been a little clearer, because we already can make those connections. But for these, I think we were all working so hard in the back of our minds with every new character of wondering, okay, are they related to someone? Does it have to do someone? And that's not a fun way to read. It's not a fun way to exist. It's fun to do after. It's why these conversations are enjoyable. It's why we like talking about it. Because if you can be like, oh man, you know what I realized? Maybe this is this, maybe this is that. But because it all kind of felt like we were expecting something more, we really had to try very, very hard to force that. Whereas like in the Blade comic, which I thought was wildly successful, we knew this is Porter Engle. I know what happens to Porter Engle. I know who he becomes. So I'm excited to see what part of his past makes him become that. And that's a very successful prequel, which is hard, especially when you're going through all these, different comics and different middle grade, young adult, audio drama, trying to connect everything. That's very difficult. But at the same time, I think it can be better done by making those strings much easier, like you said, Charles. Absolutely.
I mean, just make it a character-driven prequel instead of a plot, I guess, driven prequel, if you will, because there has to be, I don't know, if the mystery we're trying to unfold is some of these plot points. There has to be a framework of familiarity in there, I feel like,
Yeah.
to build upon. And that was not there because they went so far back in time.
Is it, remind me again, is final, is it 3 phases, or do we even know? Do we think? Did they say
So-
only
It's 3, right?
3 phases?
They keep teasing that it will not be the end. I can't remember the
remember
exact
hearing that.
wording, but essentially we're going to get phase 3 and then more to come.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one of
Then
the things
phase 2.5.
well, so one of the things
yeah.
around that I think will be interesting is we're about to get that anthology book that's about to come out. We're going to get some comics that are supposed to be set between phases 1 and 3. Like, I have a feeling that there's a chance that those are just going to kind of maybe recap some of the things we just learned from phase 2, but from the present day, perspective. Like, I think we're going to have a
That could
Yoda
work.
conversation about, oh yeah, this stuff happened back in, 100 years ago. Now here we can be prepared. Like, I could see some little touches on things like that happening. And so I think all of this could have, like, in the conversation of would phase 2 be required reading at all? Would we jump from phase 1 to 3? I think we're going to say phase 1 anthology stuff, phase 3, and then go back to phase 2 kind of a thing.
This meeting could have been an email.
Yes.
Essentially. That's very much how I feel.
There's just so much of a time gap between phase 2 and phase 1. They have the ability to add a couple books in there or anthologies or something to build upon the fact of where Marda Row ends and where Markion Row starts. So
and I think my theory as well is that I think phase 3 ends their Skywalker saga of the High Republic, as it were. I think this is the main line of the Jedi of the High Republic versus the Nile and Markion Row. We got a little history, but the main event is this, and the end of phase 3 is going to be, boom, the trials of the Jedi. They go through it. Here we are. But we now know the Acolyte is a show that's going to be happening, so we're getting High Republic visual media. I think that with Siglain saying this is only the beginning of the High Republic, it's kind of like saying after Return of the Jedi, well, this is only the beginning of the Rebellion era. Yeah, duh, because now we got more books, we got more shows, Star Wars Outlaws, like we can do stuff around it. And like you say, Wes, that gap is huge. But I don't think we're gonna be getting and then phase 4, Charles Soule's doing this, Cuddy Gray's doing this. And maybe this is also just wishful thinking. I hope that it becomes a little more in the rotation of Star Wars books. Like, here's a prequel book, here's a High Republic era book, here's a sequel era book, here's a Dawn of the Jedi book. Like, I hope it becomes less structured and they can just start telling stories in multiple eras. Because I think that's when we've gotten some of our best books. Have like Master and Apprentice. That was just a random prequel book. That was great out of nowhere, and I hope that we kind of get a little more freedom with that, or just number the trilogies if you want to do more of that. Like, give me 3 books with numbers on the spine, and then do 3 more with numbers on the spine. Like, I think clarity is really the issue. But it's weird though, because like you said, Tim, we're looking ahead at this anthology that's coming out. That's gonna recap a bunch of stuff. We're gonna have some stories that take place in the year before phase 3. The new comic that got announced this week, which is the Shadows of Starlight, I believe, is gonna be a 4-issue limited series by Charles Soule that takes place in the year before phase 3. So ultimately, if you made it this far and haven't read phase 2, hope you enjoyed.
So sorry,
but it will be interesting for us to figure out if these materials allow you to just jump into phase 3, because I think you're right, Tim. I think it sounds like that's exactly what they're doing. Yeah, which is an interesting choice when you just published a year of content, and you're like, but if you don't want to read it,
if this does anything for me, I think it's similar to a comics conversation of, there are 4 mainline comics, but you don't have to read them all. Just read the ones you like, read the stories you like. I think this is the first time I have felt like I can confidently say this with a book kind of series. If you liked phase 1 and you want to know more about, specifically what's going on with the path, then just read the YA novels. If you want to know
Yeah.
more about what's happening with the galaxy at large and how the Republic's feeling about everything, just read the adult novels. You don't have to read everything, but I only get that from having consumed it all.
That's
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
fine, because
That's
there are
gonna
those of
be
us that will do that, and I think we can really kind of maybe lead the way on having some more of
Yeah.
those intentional conversations.
It's gonna
Yeah.
be so hard to explain. It's gonna be
Yeah.
like one of those Goosebumps choose your ending books where it's like, okay, now flip to page 72 because you
Yeah.
ran down the left hallway instead of the right. Like it's not gonna be straightforward at all.
Yeah, like if someone's like, "Hey, I want to read a Jedi-esque scoundrel romance duology," like, could you just say, "Here's Convergence and Cataclysm" with nothing else in the High Republic? And I think some people have. Like, there's people, there's cosplayers that only do Phase 2 stuff on Twitter, like that just started at Phase 2. So it's got to be possible. And I earnestly wonder if once Phase 3 is done, might I recommend like read Phase 1 and Phase 3, and then you know what? Then go back to Phase 2, because then you get a history lesson. Like maybe that'll be cool. I don't know. I've never been this unsure about something that seems so meticulously plotted out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I would love especially having consumed everything, including the middle grades. I feel
Yes.
like I need a like kind of like a timelines book, but I need like an overhead perspective book on like where everyone is at different stages of all of these dang battles.
Yes.
That would be interesting.
Yes.
See
Our
some kind
Our
of
timeline folks
semblance of
have
that.
are having a wild time. Phase 1 was very easy to figure out. A little behind the scenes for y'all. Our timeline team and some other folks have been talking extensively about the High Republic reading order, because I think it's the most visited page on our site, which thank you, utini.com. Head over there. Phase 2, with every comic issue, is such a minefield right now, and we're figuring it out because there are comics that happen in between each other, and the Battle of Jeddah kind of happens throughout a bunch
Everywhere.
and then Vengeance starts back and stuff. All to say, I think this is a good book. I think this is all of these things aside, I think this book, for a person that pulled up a typesetter and typed out a novel on paper about characters going through things, was written super well. And if you can somehow let go of everything we just talked about for an hour, I think it's a pretty good time. I guess the last thing I want to ask you guys before we kind of wrap up, has Phase 2 changed your thoughts on how you want to consume Phase 3? Or, and I'm going to lead you here a little bit, like me, are you pretty convinced that Phase 3 is going to be way more like Phase 1?
I have a horrible feeling of FOMO. Really when it has to do with a lot of things. But if I miss out on a book that I didn't read and everybody is chatting about it in our Slack, or I see something on Twitter where I've missed a whole like sequence of a main plot point or main storyline, and I go into another book and I just start in fresh, then yeah, I will be upset. I'll totally be mad. So, and this isn't, I think this is just an anomaly where this book kind of rehashed a lot of stuff to where it got us to where we were at. But I don't think Phase 3 is going to be the same way. And because of the kind of the events that we saw from Phase 1 and the characters that we got, we've already been introduced to these characters. I think now we're just going to build on some of them that aren't with us anymore. But I think that, I think I'm going to continue with the reading. I'm not going to miss out on anything.
All right.
I mean, I'm going to read. We have shows to do, guys. But it's also like it's kind of the entire idea that drives a lot of fandom, right? It's that law of escalating commitment. The more time and energy and money that you put towards a thing, the more you're going to continue to do that thing, because you're scared to admit that what you did before wasn't worth it. And so
that's why people stay in Scientology.
Okay, yeah.
It's a real thing. You put in so much money and time, you can't admit it's a cult till you're already in.
Your thetan levels weren't high enough.
Is that what came after the Path of the Closed Fist? Were they Scientologists before?
Scientology.
No, okay. No, but I mean that's what it comes down to. I mean, I'm going to keep reading these books, don't get me wrong, for a lot of different reasons, but that really is a part of it. I mean, when you've put in this many pages of material, to learn this story, and then supposedly kind of the end is coming up, you're gonna read it. How can you walk away at that point?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I do think phase 3 is going to be a lot better, and I think it's going to be a lot better because I have a pretty, invested interest in the characters that we're going to go back and pick up. Like, I cannot wait to see Belzetifar on the page again.
Oh my
You
God.
know what I mean? And that is what was missing from this entire phase for me. So yes, I'm going to read it.
Great.
Yeah. I think this will be a return to phase 1 kind of style in general, even if it's just because of the structure that we're getting 3 adult novels, 3 middle grade novels, 3 young adult novels.
Yeah.
And we'll get the full cast of, the original Luminous authors in the mix. I know, George Mann and Alyssa Wong, and, they'll all be writing some stuff in their own lanes, but I think I have a feeling that phase 2 is just kind of a blip. It's just one of those things that I'm probably gonna look back and pretend it probably didn't happen for the time being, and that phase 3 will be returned to form for what we know and what we're used to.
Yeah, it's okay. And that's
exactly. And I think that's exactly where I am. Like, I feel like, mostly for the reasons you said, Charles, like, these characters that are coming back in phase 3 are who I loved in phase 1 and I fell in love with immediately. And it's their story continuing. Now I have some context. I didn't love the context as much, and that's okay. If I had to do it again, I probably wouldn't do it. I will be more interested to see what the YA and middle grades are like. Because, again, we read everything, just kind of how we are. Obviously, we have shows to do and we have reviews to put up. I hope that they are a little more tied in, and I hope that it makes a little more sense. Because phase 1... I think the adult trilogy in phase 1 is still my favorite Star Wars trilogy. I'll say that easily as far as books go. Like, I think it's just banger, banger, banger. The YA is hit and miss a little bit for me there, even then. So I hope that the quality of them all pick up, but I don't see myself necessarily having the reluctance I did with phase 2 and the meta reading. I hope I can just shut it off and just read. So I guess maybe that'll be the test for my broken brain. Is like, can I not think about the grand context anymore because we're finally in phase 3? Like, I don't have to think about how this affects Markian Row because I see Markian Row on the page. I hope that'll really help.
Yeah.
So for everyone in the chat and everyone listening, I'm eager to hear what y'all think about this. Obviously, this is a very different vibe for us than usual. We all agree this is a great written book. But phase 2 was such a mixed bag that we're very excited to see what phase 3 can do with it. If you loved phase 2, that's amazing. I'm glad. Leave a comment on why you did and what you love more, or love most, rather. I do want to leave you with one more thing, because we're not doing our traditional Easter eggs as we used to, but I did find one, because it's about my favorite thing. On page 255, there was a quote that said, blankety blank, but his head is ringing like a Phyrexian chime, from Ferrex, which is from Andor. Best thing phase 2 ever did was remind me of Andor. So, with all that being said, phase 3 is right around the corner. I'm not sure how we're going to handle the anthology book. Anthologies are a little odd. We might have a show catching people up. I'm not sure if all of us are going to read it, but stay tuned for that later this summer. Again, next week we're talking games, though. Tim, thank you for jumping on and chat about this. Fellas, appreciate your time as well. Everyone in the chat and around the world, give Charles the best vibes he needs for the next about 3 hours for Heat and 7. Here we go. And on that note, everybody, that is going to do it for this week's episode of The Living Force. If you support us on Patreon, thank you so much. Keep an eye out for everything coming your way this month. A special thank you to Brian Dooley, Earl Q, Carl Sander, Zach W, and Michael Fry on our Jedi High Council, and James T, Ashley Ingalls, Colton Fife, and Chris Carrizo on our Alliance High Command. You can find us on Twitter. I'm at Eric Eilerson, Charles is at Ziankle, Wes is at Boss West, Timothy is at TC Guthrie 2, and we're at Living Force Pod. A special thank you to Matt Davenport, our amazing editor, Ryan, our graphic designer extraordinaire, and Wes, our producer and community manager. Thank you to Charles, Wes, and Tim for potting with me tonight. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. And as always, may the Force be with you.